It was on this very spot in Canterbury Cathedral that one of the most significant and dramatic events of the medieval age took place. The murder of Archbishop Thomas Becket on the 29th of December 1170, when, after a long-lasting dispute, Henry II is said to have exclaimed, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?" 4 knights set off for Canterbury and murdered Thomas Becket in his own cathedral. The knights burst through the cathedral through this door, and swords drawn, apparently shouting, "Where is Thomas Becket, traitor to the king and the kingdom?" They found him at this spot and began hacking him to pieces. One sword stroke was so violent that it sliced the crown off his skull and shattered the blade's tip on the pavement. Then a clerk also joined the knights, and, as the sources put it, he put his foot on the neck of the holy priest and precious martyr, and, horrible to say, scattered the brains with his blood over the pavement. "Let us go, knights," he cried out to the others. "This fellow will not get up again," which was perhaps rather stating the obvious. But it was an event which shocked the medieval world, and healing miracles were soon attributed to Thomas, and he was made a saint by the Pope in 1173, just 3 years after his death.
So you can see it wasn't just Anselm that had trouble with the kings of England. Becket is famous for being murdered, of course. Murder in the Cathedral is a famous play also, by the way. But I especially liked it because the school my one daughter went to here in Anchorage, Holy Rosary, I don't know if you're familiar with it, she and others of her class all performed that play. That was kind of neat to go see. But so Anselm, very interesting person, and here's the argument that we'll have to look at today, because it sets up what Kant called the ontological argument. Oh, I was going to write. It's like so primitive, isn't it? I can always just use this. I still every once in a while go back to so you can look this up. You can see that ontological, that's how you spell it. What does it mean? Ontos is Greek for thing. And so basically it means like the definition of the thing. And logical, of course, is the logic associated with that definition. So from the logic of the definition itself, you get a particular argument. Notice this one is proslogion. So looking at the argument, now he's setting us up here. In chapter 1. But so chapter 2. Truly, there is a God, although the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. My quiz question today is there a largest pizza in Anchorage? There are pizzas. Everybody agrees? There are pizzas. Yes, Robin?
Sorry. I'm a little confused to how these two connect.
I'll explain.
Well,
I don't know how I would approach it without being somewhat apparently disconnected to start with. But for example, there are pizzas. And in fact, if you don't believe it, I have 2 in my freezer at home. And that's Eagle River, but that's part of Anchorage. And so there are pizzas, guaranteed. There's at least one. So the question is there a largest pizza in Anchorage? Existing at the moment? Yes. Seems like a mathematical requirement, right? Because even if there's only one, well, that pizza's the largest. We might also ask, is there a smallest? And yes, there would be, right? Is there a greenest pizza? Might not be very delicious if it is a greenest pizza. But let me explain. The definition that Anselm gives to God is that than which, a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. Now notice, this is what's referred to as the via negativa. He's not saying what God is. He's saying that nothing is greater than God, by definition. Right? So, it's not a pizza. It's not saying there's a pizza and pizza, the greatest pizza in Anchorage. At the same time, what he is saying is that since by definition God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived or thought, it must be the case that God exists. Because we understand the definition, and since it's in our understanding, it also makes sense to us. It seems just as logically necessary when I ask, is there a largest pizza? I know there are pizzas, there are things, and God is, by definition, greater than anything. Yes?
So is God the greatest pizza?
If he is, pizza will send for you. Sorry, I needed an opportunity to use that line. You know where that line is from? No, yes, that's okay. Robin knows. Spaceballs. Remember Pizza the Hut? That's the Pizza Hut. Well, in Spaceballs, there's a character named Pizza the Hut. That's kind of the
Half man, half pizza?
is he? I don't know exactly. He looks pretty awful. Let me.
I'm pretty sure he's half man, half pizza.
Is he? Is that where he comes from?
Yeah.
Pizza the Hut. I've never looked up Pizza the Hut before. What? I got a commercial. How can you get a commercial for that? Pizza the Hut. So if you don't pay up, pizza we'll send out for you. That's where that's from. I love that opportunity to use that line. It's ridiculous. It's a squirrel. But seriously, there are things. So we have no doubt that there are things that exist. And the definition of God, according to Anselm, and by the way, this wins. This argument, or this definition, is still used today, as we'll see, at least as far as Aquinas and so on. But I've heard other theologians use it. So once this, 1100 AD roughly is the definition. And once we get that definition, God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. And it's not limited by something. So notice this does not argue that God is a person. It doesn't argue that God has a particular shape or anything of that sort. It's not located any particular place. There's no characteristic that's given to it that identifies it, except that by definition, God must be greater. By definition, there's nothing else that's greater than God, because, well, if there were, that would be God, right? So if you're a scientist, for example, and you feel like, well, the universe is all there is, right? Well, in that case, that would fit the definition. You might certainly say, okay, so for your point of view, the definition of God is the universe. But I mean, it's possible that there's something even greater than the universe, because we could ask, well, what created the universe? We don't know. But yes?
It seems like limiting on oneself of your ability to actually conceive anything greater than what you can conceive. Like,
We are,
you
yeah,
have
I would
the
say,
ability to conceive more than just say God, big G, little g, like you're limiting yourself on the ability to conceive something or perceive something else that may be higher in your own eyes.
well, of course, what the theologians are telling us is that, by definition, God has this top of the heap characteristic. You know.
And with this, it seems like you can still conceive God, but that's it. That's the limit on what your ability to conceive things are.
Well, yeah, it's not the end all of theological debate. I mean, it's just arguing, can we prove that God exists? Well, if by definition we say that the word God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. Feels like wordplay, but the interesting thing is, if you say that is the definition, and theologians actually accept this as the definition, then we also have to understand that by definition it must exist. Because there are things, and there are things that are greater than other things, and that than which nothing greater can be thought must also exist. Because if it's not the universe, and because there's something even greater, well, by definition, that's greater must be God, right? So you're not stuck with this. I mean, and the frustration with it is that if you want to prove that, your favorite description of God is demonstrated by this argument, you're wrong. It doesn't do that. It doesn't do that for you at all. But it does demonstrate that whenever you're using the concept of God, there's a referent. Something is out there that we're thinking of. So even the fool is convinced. My kind of a sideline question is, who is the fool? When you're thinking about this, when Anselm says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And I'm wondering, which fool is he talking about? Well, he's taking this out of Scripture, actually. Yes? Did you raise your hand? Oh, okay. My own thinking is that this was something that occurred to St. Anselm himself when he was thinking over this, that at certain points in his life he had doubts. I mean, I think that's pretty common. If you're a thinking thing, you're wondering all this stuff that the priest is telling you, is that really true? You're going to doubt some of this stuff. And so I think at some point Anselm thought to himself, there is no way God exists. And so he's the fool, I think, that he's referring to, although of course it could be other. That's my guess, right? So something exists in the understanding, at least than which nothing greater can be conceived. For when he hears of this, he understands it. And whatever is understood exists in the understanding. And assuredly, that than which nothing greater can be conceived cannot exist in the understanding alone. For suppose it exists in the understanding alone, then it can be conceived to exist in reality, which is greater. So this is essentially, therefore, the ontological argument. Therefore, if that than which nothing greater can be conceived exists in the understanding alone, the very being than which nothing greater can be conceived is one than which a greater can be conceived. But obviously this is impossible, Hence, there is doubt that there exists a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, and it exists both. It should be that. Hence, there is no doubt, I think, and it exists both in the understanding and in reality. So, therefore, God cannot be conceived not to exist. Now, in this text, you get another monk named Ganilio, and I don't see him yet, but Ganilio will be the one who will question this. And I don't know if Ganilio was a real monk that responded to this, or if he was made up opponent, as part of the document. Where is he? Hello. But he comes up with the question, I can conceive of some great things that don't exist. For example, look for it, but a golden island. I can conceive of a golden island. There are islands, but I can conceive of a golden island. But guess what? Anselm, gold islands don't exist. So there. So this argument doesn't work. Well, the failure with Ganilio's criticism is that he's defining the island as a particular type of island. Anselm isn't defining God as having certain characteristics that then you can turn around and say, well, but those don't actually exist. So the definition seems to escape this criticism. And we could also point out to Ganilio that there are islands, yes. In fact, there is a greatest island. Certainly it's not gold. But I think, isn't Greenland considered to be the largest island on the earth? Because it's not a continent.
It depends on how you define island.
For sure, yeah. Because Australia is a continent.